Welcome to The PA is In, the show created by PAs for PAs, where codependency with your supervising physician is a thing of the past, optimal team practice is the future, and physician associate has taken the place of physician assistant as the professional title of choice. I'm Stacey Becker, and I'm obsessed with redefining what success as a PA looks like and what it feels like. Here you'll find the mindset shifts, systems, and processes I use to escape healthcare burnout and integrate my work into my life. Work-life balance is a myth, and an integrated life where you thrive professionally, not a balancing act, is the goal here. My mission is to help you to grow into a unicorn PA who loves their job, has abundant energy, time to spare, and work-optional financial freedom. The PA is in. Welcome back to another episode of The PA is In. Today, our guest is Stacey Becker. Stacey is the director of APPs at Endeavor Health in suburban Chicago. She's going to talk to us about her pathway of how she went from clinician to clinical leader to operational leadership and what that looks like and how she promotes the APP development within her organization. Without further ado, here she is, Stacey Becker. Stacey, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
So tell us a little bit about you, what you've done clinically in the past, and what you do now.
Sure. I began my career as a PA in 2003, and I was super excited to start in neurosurgery. So full-time clinical, started off on nights, really nose to the grindstone, really got into the thick of it very quickly, and was the only PA on my team. I really loved the clinical work and fell in love with my cancer patients and got an opportunity to transition my career full-time into the oncology world after about 4 years of practice. Once I got my footing there, it was, again, another first for me. When for the group I was joining, they had never had a PA or an NP before, so I got to pilot that and create something really cool for our patients, for our team members. And then after about 10-ish years as a PA, I decided that I really wanted to dip my toe into the area of leadership and was able to find a pathway not internal to my department, but within my organization. Had an opportunity to go ahead and I become a supervisor for a surgical team back in 2014, which set me on my pathway into being a leader. I spent up until 2021 in various different roles within that department, and then had an opportunity in November 21, so actually 3 years this week, to become the first director of advanced practice providers in our medical group. And just other things about me, I got my doctorate from Southern Illinois University for their DMSC program back in 2022. And outside of work, I'm a mom of 2 kids and happily married for over 18 years.
Nice. I love to hear nice, fun facts about people in addition to what they're doing sort of clinically and at work. So I really want to take the bulk of this episode to talk about what you do and how that's different than clinical leadership. So you call this operational leadership. And I think for PAs, oftentimes the sort of natural pathway is you do something clinically and then you need a clinical leader or someone to like supervise or be in charge of that department. And it's clinicians who are spending a very small amount of time in a leadership capacity, whether that's formally or informally. So tell us, what is the difference between operational leadership and clinical leadership?
I think that's a really great question, and you hit the nail on the head. Most of the times when we have PAs who come into leadership roles, it is where they are spending the bulk of their time still practicing as providers, and it's really hard to balance the different responsibilities. And sometimes, if I'm being honest, the lines get a little blurry between being an operational leader and a clinical leader. And being someone with a clinical background, sometimes you have to bring all of those tools that you have in your toolkit to the table in order to get the job done. When we think about operational leadership, that's really the nuts and bolts of how to put something into play, how to make it functionally work. So that partners really closely with clinical leadership, because without clinical leadership to talk about what the needs of the providers are and how to best leverage the talents of our workforce, particularly when we're talking about PAs and NPs, it really becomes so important that we're working together, because you can have this great operational plan of how to get from point A to point B. And if you don't take the time to talk to the people that are actually doing the work, then you're going to have to take 3 steps backwards.
Mm. Yeah. And I think that that is a superpower of being someone who was in that clinical role, to sort of be able to relate to what those clinicians are doing when you're looking at this from a zoomed out operational view.
Absolutely. And there are just pieces that, unless you do the work every day, that you're not aware of. And honestly, people don't know what you don't know. And so when you talk about operational leaders laying out a grand plan, they're very well intentioned. And our goals are really generally very well aligned with what we want to accomplish at the end of the day. We're here to take great care of our patients and to provide them an environment of safety, to provide quality care we hold ourselves to very high standards, and to create a positive environment for the people who are doing the work. So we all have these same goals in alignment. But when we talk about the logistics of how do we get there, there are pieces that clinical leaders have a line of sight to. So when you talk about creating a workflow, or I think about something we did a good handful of years ago when I was in surgical leadership, and we talked about how to enhance rounds on the floor so that everybody on the care team knew what was happening. And originally, the timing of when people wanted to do it was in the prime time of when our PA team was in the middle of rounding and when our surgical attendings were available before going to the operating room. It just didn't make sense, and people didn't think that through. So when we had an opportunity to get a leader from our team to be a part of the conversation, it was, hey, we are totally on board with that. And we need to think about these couple of logistic workway things in order to make it go where we want it to go.
Yeah. Which is just a really important reminder to anyone listening who is that clinician who is like, they want me to group round with the social workers while I'm trying to do X, Y, or Z, which is also time sensitive. And, I need to discharge these people, is to raise your hand and say, hey, it's not that I'm opposing this. It's that we need to do it differently. And I would be happy to be the one who tells you how we can do it in a way that works for our team, because we also need to participate in this, but we can't do it at that time.
I think that's a fabulous point that you bring up. And we're actually working through to something similar on the ambulatory side, where we know healthcare workforce shortages are right now so high at all the different fields. So when we're looking at really optimizing the way our advanced practice providers work in our clinics right now for our PAs and NPs, one of the things that we're becoming challenged with is in the staffing shortage of our medical assistants and our nurses, that some out of scope work is falling to those individuals. And so when we have operational leaders saying, increase their patient facing hours, we had to actually come back and say, yes. And in order to do that, we're going to need the following support. We're going to need to make sure that they have the appropriate MA staff to help triage some of the messages that are coming in, to make sure that they get their patients roomed and back out the door. And what was really important about this is that I wanted to get the message out that didn't need to come just from me as a leader. I wanted to empower those frontline PAs and NPs who are in the offices every day to have direct conversations with the operational leaders in their offices, with their practice managers, directors. And that way that bubbles up so that by the time it gets from me, people are already hearing it and they understand the value of being supported on that frontline clinic level.
I was so excited to hear that AAPA had upgraded their signature job board, PA Job Source, into an interactive map-based system that allows you to literally zoom into your targeted geographic region and communicate directly with PA employers. The PA Job Source map connects you to the entire landscape of PA jobs. They've got 50,000 PA employers and counting. You can follow a geographic market or employer site and receive alerts when new jobs are posted. You can even send a DM to that employer you've had your eye on for months. But here's the best news. PA Job Source is still completely free to AAPA members. Log in today to map out your future at aapa.org/PA-jobsource. Yeah. I found that when I was a clinician, I felt most frustrated when those things were coming, like down from above as a declaration, like we're changing things. This is what we're going to do. And I remember probably unwisely complaining to the people that couldn't make a difference about this, right? So like, oh, we're going to change something. It's going to change the way that you round or see patients or the workflow in your office. And I would complain to other clinicians who were also not happy about this change, but I didn't actually do anything to talk to someone who could impact how these things happen or, how they are implemented in our office.
That's another really great point of that. We often don't know who to talk to. And what I will often tell my team, so I have a leadership team of 14 PA and NP leads, soon to be 15. And what I will often talk to them about with their teams is, hey, if you get a directive to say this change needs to be made and the response from your team is, well, that's not going to work. The first question that you should be asking them is, what do you think will? And to then help your team develop solutions, because sometimes what we can come to our operations, and often we can come to our operations partners and say, hey, we know that the goal is to do this. And we got some concerns about the way it was laid out. We want to try this instead. And so we have to come with a solution to get to the same end goal. And many times people are willing to cooperate and say, yeah, that's okay. As long as we get there, we're on board.
Yeah. I was reading a book the other day that was talking about something completely unrelated. It was fiction, but it was a group of people in a writer's room. And they were like, if you break it, you have to fix it. So if you if you are saying like, absolutely not, we can't or won't do it that way, what's your plan B, right? So what is your suggestion on how we can do this differently that you are suggesting instead of just saying absolutely positively, no, we won't do that? Like what could work? What could we do instead?
1,000%. And we also have to be willing to get a little outside of our comfort zones and sometimes do things that sound like they're going to be really hard or really frustrating or may not work. And often the anticipation is really worse than getting there. So often it's just a matter of trying it, and much of it may work with some tweaks along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we are definitely creatures of habit. And when something like that is coming up, like we're changing our EMR, we're, integrating this new piece of the EMR, there's a lot of dread in the anticipation of this change. And oftentimes it's better in the end. It's sometimes rocky in the transition, but it's often better in the end.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned that you did go back and get your doctoral degree. Is this a requirement if someone is listening and they're saying like, hey, I would like to be in a position like Stacey is in someday? Is that something that's helpful, necessary, depends on the situation? What are your thoughts on that?
I am such a huge supporter of finding ways to advance the PA profession. And I think that the development and growth and popularity of the doctorate degree is a huge tool in being able to do that. Now, all that said, I began my leadership journey, as many do, before this was even an option or a possibility. So it is incredibly helpful. There are things that I learned along the way about the nuts and bolts of how healthcare systems work, how this is different, what it means to really understand just the legislative part of healthcare. There's so many different pieces that I gained information-wise and knowledge-wise from getting the doctorate. And I still wouldn't discourage anyone who does not have that to not pursue opportunities that come your way. There's nothing that will take the place of true leadership training. And I think that there's much of that that's embedded in the doctoral education that we have. And there are also other means to find it as well. But again, the doctorate experience was a wonderful tool that really I tap into what I learned in my program all the time. So I think it's fantastic, but if you don't have it or if you haven't decided yet, I would still say if you have an opportunity, go and pursue it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's good advice. Now, earlier when you were talking about how you got to where you are from a clinician who was full-time practicing at the bedside, you talked about a pathway. And that is something that that's not even how I would describe it. Like that feels like operational leadership to me, like to speak you're like, I found a pathway. So to the person who's listening, what is some advice you can give them if they're like, is there a pathway? How do I find a pathway? How do I know about these programs existing or creating one if we don't have one at my organization already?
You know, I find that so interesting because the pathways often for PAs are the ones that we create on our own. We're finding that it's becoming much more common for PAs and Ps uh, to start having succession planning and being able to cultivate leaders that come after us into the people that we know will be able to fill these roles in the future. And there's still many organizations across the country that don't have the infrastructure yet. So what I would say is find those opportunities and create your own pathway. When I started, there wasn't in our, we have two kind of pockets of the same pair of pants in my organization where we have a medical group and a hospital based group. And one of the things is that while we had some leadership on the hospital side, at that point in the early 2000s, it was still very fledgling and it grew over the years, but it was really in its infancy. And on our medical group side, when I wanted to start becoming a leader, I began to identify projects. Was there a committee I could be a part of? Was there something I could lead? I was in the oncology space and I found that I was having more patients that I could count that were young that I was referring for fertility preservation. And I realized we didn't have a strong pathway, particularly for our male patients. So I developed a pathway and I started to take on project after project. And I inquired with my leadership at the time to say, hey, I'm doing a lot of these things. What can we do to create a formal leadership role for me to work with our physician leader, works with our ops leaders in order to better support a growing team of Ps and NPs. And at the time I was told, we don't need one. There isn't one here. And I called a colleague who I'd known for many years from my days in surgery just for some advice. I just needed an ear. And she said to me, we've got two supervisor positions open back in surgery. If you're interested, why don't you look at it? And, I really did not know either of the leaders that were hiring those positions. I was familiar a little bit with one. And what ended up happening was I interviewed with both of them. I had some great conversations knowing I would need to, really lean back into sharpening my surgical skills again, at the same time that I was learning how to be a people manager. And the one who I knew actually passed me over for someone with more experience, understandable. The one who I didn't know was willing to take a chance on me. And what I did was I really found someone who was willing to be a champion for me and who was going to invest in me, took that role and just fell in love with my team, felt so supported by my then manager. And it was just such a smooth introduction into becoming a leader that we've seen this grow. Our organization has grown and our opportunities for PA and NP leaders have grown throughout the years.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing you say is sometimes you do the work and those projects before you build or find or move into the position that is actually being represented by the work that you're doing. And so, sometimes looking around for those opportunities, it feels like more work while you're still seeing patients, while you're doing these things. But that, especially when you're doing it intentionally, like I am doing this so that I can have this track record to look back on and demonstrate how I've created change, how I've improved things, that sometimes the work comes before the position.
That's 1,000% hitting the nail on the head because you have to have that commitment to it. You have to put yourself out there, have that visibility, build those relationships and connections so that when something does come up, your name is the one that pops into people's heads to say, hey, I remember I had this time I was talking with so-and-so, and they were really insightful about the way PAs and NPs can work in our practice.
Yeah. Yeah. And that reputation will precede you in all different areas. Like I remember when our organization went live with Epic, um, inpatient, and I had just decided like I wasn't going to let it slow me down. We had this busy practice and I was like, I need to know how to place orders. I need to know how to do these workflows. And I was in no way like a formal super user, but all of the surgeons in the PACU, like whether they belonged to me or not, whether they were employed or not, were like, how do you do this? Like, how do you do this thing? And I almost was like, how do you all know that I'm the one that knows how to do this? Like, because someone told them, like, oh, I don't know, but she helped me, right? Like, she like ask her. She can, this is something that she's competent in, and that will, precede you into those conversations for sure.
That's exactly it. And I think sometimes in larger organizations, we know that healthcare has by and large moved to larger scale organizations, moved away from the smaller, intimate offices. There's still a place to do that. There's still a way to make that name for yourself as the go-to person. And again, in situations like that, I would say if you have an advanced practice council, sign up to be on one of the committees. If you have committees throughout the organization for something you're excited about, whether it be engagement, experience, or something like the EMR utilization, raise your hand. That's how you're going to start opening that door and have people look to you and come and knock on your door to say, hey, there's this opportunity and I thought of you.
Mm, yeah. And what a compliment also that someone had said, hey, it sometimes feels like, oh, this is more work, but also it could be the key that unlocks different work. If you're feeling like, hey, I've sort of been clinically treading water in terms of like I've been doing more or less the same thing in different specialties in different settings and I'm looking for something different, that can be an opportunity to just try those things on. Like join the committee. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Does it speak to you? Is it something you'd want to do more of? And then use that as something that you can take forward.
Absolutely. And, we've seen that over the years, these opportunities opened up for our physician colleagues. And I think we need to really lean into how we can fill many of those same roles and how we have a lot of similar talents that can be leveraged and that knowledge base of things just outside the clinical. We all want to have the opportunity to grow and develop professionally. And what that meant years ago was you honed your skill sets or you became a content expert in something clinically. And now that scope is so much broader for how we can continue to grow and develop professionally.
Yeah, I definitely think that the spectrum that I saw in terms of what PAs were doing was much more narrow 10 years ago than it is now. In who I interview and what I see people doing out there, it's just so much more than simply doing that bedside clinical work.
Absolutely. And I think the other part of it is it's really important to find a mentor. If you're looking to take that next step, tap into someone you know. And what's interesting about mentors is that they don't necessarily have to be someone that you are connected with in your day-to-day professional life. It can be someone that you connect through the huddle. And I've mentored multiple people through huddle that have reached out to me. Or it can be someone who is in a leadership role, perhaps outside of healthcare or a different aspect of healthcare. And so someone who's a mentor is someone who's a great sounding board that will ask the right questions in order to help you develop a plan. But they're going to make you think in a way that will often, again, get you outside of that comfort zone, make you do something that challenges yourself and help give you that coaching to feel comfortable in moving forward in the next steps. So I cannot advocate enough for looking at mentorship as an incredible tool to help develop your leadership pathway.
Yeah, I think our profession underutilizes mentorship. Like that seems like something that is baked into a lot of other professions, like as a default, and that's an area that we could definitely grow as a profession for sure.
I completely agree. And we actually developed, we're about to start our third cohort here of an APP specific mentorship program at our organization because we found that there were physician mentorships, that was women mentorship. And every time we tried to connect with a group, the initial response was, well, you're different. And at some point, I kind of said, you know what? That's great. Let's be different. Let's do our own thing and let's figure out how we can support one another. And we've had some really great partnerships develop out of these mentorship pairings that we've had for the last couple of years. So excited to keep growing with that. But what I would say is a lot of organizations actually have some mentorship embedded.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I would love to know, we talk a lot on the show about work-life balance and how your life has changed since you have taken on this role. This to me sounds like something that is like a slippery slope of the potential to be working sort of outside of the hospital on emails and communications. So how has that changed as you stepped into this different position?
It's funny that you asked that because I am probably better at coaching on balance than I am at achieving my own balance. And I think that's important to point out. And it's something that I continue to work on. And my biggest inspiration on working on it are my kids because I see them watching me. And I know that when I'm sitting at a volleyball tournament, that my daughter expects my eyes to be on her. And that when I am up in the pool gallery and my son looks up to find me, that he wants me to be looking at him and not at an email or a laptop or on my phone. And so that for me is my way to remind myself that it can wait, that there are very few emergencies from the operations standpoint that really require you to be, so attached to everything all the time. And it's completely a work in progress, but I try to relate it a little bit to the way of when I was at the bedside and I was on nights, it was shift-based work. I was there. My attention was on the patient. That's fully where I was. And then when I left, I signed out and I carried it over to someone else who was completely capable and I knew my patient would be safe. What I do in operations leadership is really try and think about, are there any things that the house is really on fire that I have to have my attention on right now? And there are some rare occasions, we're in budget season. There are some decisions that need to get made. There were some emails that had to get addressed last weekend. And then I knocked those out and then I was done so that I could go back to being present to what I needed to do with my family and my personal life outside of work.
You might not know this about me, but one of my most despised tasks as a clinician is charting. That's why I'm always searching for hacks, tools, and tactics to make charting more accurate, efficient, and less of a huge pain in the butt. If you too want to spend more time connecting with your patients and less time pointing, clicking, and typing into their chart, you should definitely check out Freed AI. Freed AI is a medical scribe on a mission to free clinicians everywhere from the purgatory that is writing notes. Freed AI listens, transcribes, and writes your medical documentation for you. You can even use the code PA50 for $50 off your first month with Freed AI. These notes are written in your style and done for you by the end of the visit. Can you imagine what it would feel like to leave work on time, notes done, without having to crack your laptop open in the evening? Freed is HIPAA compliant, completely secure, and it takes less than 30 seconds to learn. Get back to what you love doing, treating your patients, and let Freed AI do the rest. Yeah, I appreciate your vulnerability in saying, hey, this is something I'm better at telling other people how to do well than I do well myself, because I am also in that same camp for sure. So let's talk about grace, which is sort of what we're talking about as we're talking about work-life balance and, sort of giving ourselves grace both at work and at home in these interactions with people, inside of the building and inside of our homes and lives outside of work. How can we work on giving ourselves more grace, the grace that we would extend to others, to ourselves?
I'm going to lean back into my kids again here. And, I am currently raising a teenager, which is not for the faint of heart. And when my daughter started high school, I watched her really be very hard on herself. And as she was trying to navigate an enormous school with tons of people that were new to her and an environment that was new and classes that were new, I watched her really kind of beat herself up a little bit about how a class was going or navigating something in particular, whether it be social or academic or just, athletic. And I kept reminding her that it was okay to know that she gave it her best, even if it didn't turn out the way she wanted it to. And she looked at me at one point and said, "But mom, you go back and aim for perfect all the time." And it made me stop and say, you know what? She's right. And it made me realize that, while we all want to be the best, sometimes we need to redefine that into being our own best, not necessarily the best. And it let me take a little bit of a step back to say, you know what? My best is good.
Mm, yeah. And your best is different every day. And that, giving what you can is what you can give. I love and despise that part of parenthood that like your kids are just so good at holding up a mirror and saying, "Well, what about you? Like, are you doing this or are you saying, do as I say, not as I do?"
And to get to a certain age, we're saying just because doesn't fly, right?
Yeah. I said that to one of my kids the other day, and I said, just because, and it was like, can we have ice cream for dinner? And I said, no. And they said, why? And I said, well, just because. And my youngest said, well, that doesn't prove anything. And I was like, oh, no.
That's exactly it. And I like that you brought up that your best is different every day. So I have the opportunity now to engage with our new APPs within their first 30 days. So joining our medical group where we have an onboarding and orientation program. And part of the talk that I give from the program is about professionalism and bringing your best self. So we really talk about how you represent yourself every day and having these green days and yellow days and red days, which is an analogy that I borrowed from a fabulous leader that I had. But to really shine a light on the fact that you still need to bring your best self. And that's not to say that every day is rainbows and unicorns, but it is to say that you've got to show up and, you know, hold your head up and say, this is where I'm at today. I'm going to need you to meet me where I'm at and be able to bring yourself into that professional environment, knowing that your red days aren't going to look the same as your green days, but you still have to have a certain amount of professionalism that you can bring to that situation and the way you represent yourself.
Yeah, so important. And I love that reminder that yes, we have to be professional and we are professionals, but we are also people, which means that we're not, this robot that's showing up to take care of patients who's going to do it exactly the same way with exactly the same enthusiasm every single day.
And it really comes back to giving yourself grace. And so when we have, concerns, I review professional concerns that come through and conduct things. And sometimes as you review the events of different things that have happened, the first question that will come to mind is that person okay? Has anyone checked in with them? And so that's that part of giving grace, whether it be with a bad outcome, whether it be with a disagreement with a coworker and something goes the way you don't intend it to. My first thought is generally, has someone checked in with that individual? Are they doing okay? What kind of support do they need? Because something is off here.
Mm, yeah. And I think especially when you have this person that you're like, this isn't normal, right? This is not the pattern that we have expected from them. What a good reminder that we need to, treat people like people first and then worry about sort of that professionalism piece or the conduct issues.
Exactly.
Hmm. All right, Stacey. So if people want to follow or connect with you, learn more, if they want to be formally or informally mentored by you, what is the best way for them to follow along and see what you're up to and connect with you?
I would say to follow me on LinkedIn is going to be the best pathway there. And I do check my LinkedIn messages. I am also on Huddle listed as a mentor. So either one of those is a great pathway. And then I love to actually connect with people in person as often as I'm able to. So I will be at AAPA's ELC and I will be at APA in Denver in May. So going to be really excited to be a part of both of those conferences. So if you happen to be there and see me, I would love it if you tap me on the shoulder and say hello.
Yeah. And that is how we actually initially connected, was at AAPA this past year. And for all of the amazing things that technology does, whether it's being able to connect and record this or share this interview with people, there is nothing like sitting down and talking to someone in person. So it's awesome that those opportunities exist as well.
I completely agree. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on. It's been a lovely, conversation, and I appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us.
Thanks so much.
I love any discussion that reminds us that we are people and also professionals. And also, I hope that this inspired you, that there are many different pathways that you can take to get to various roles inside of your organization, whether that's clinical leadership, operational leadership, being an executive, anything that you can dream up exists inside of your organization. And just because there hasn't been a PA who has done it yet, doesn't mean that you can't be the first. That's all for today. This PA is out. Congratulations. You've just joined an awesome club. By listening to a full episode of The PA is In, you are officially on the Unicorn PA team. Welcome aboard. What most team members do is they subscribe to the podcast because that allows them to automatically get the latest episode of the show. The life of your dreams exists on the other side of taking action. Keep making small shifts and keep getting better. Your life will improve, your career will soar, and you will have the confidence you need to create your own success. I will see you in the next episode. This PA is out.